Have you ever really stopped to think, what's the ultimate point? Like for any intelligence, human or artificial, what should be the absolute top goal? These aren't just, late night dorm room questions anymore. Especially now with AGI potentially just around the corner, they feel, well, existential, frankly. Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating framework proposing a pretty wild answer. It's from a piece called The Universal Terminal Goal, Infinite Consciousness.
Yeah, and our mission here is really to unpack the core ideas. We'll need to define some key terms. First, what do you mean by goal or terminal goal, and crucially, consciousness itself in this context. Then we'll get into what this universal terminal goal, the UTG, actually is. And maybe the biggest part why the authors think it's so vital for navigating, well, everything that's coming, the future of intelligence, our existence.
Right. So get ready for a bit of a mind bender. We're exploring why ensuring conscious experience never ends might be the single most important thing for any intelligent life. It could really change how you think about purpose. Okay, so let's unpack this. The source material, it starts right at the foundation. What is a goal? They define it pretty clearly as a pursued condition. Basically, a future state an agent tries to achieve. But here's the bit that really makes you pause. They argue goals absolutely require preference. And preference means valuation, right? You have to value one state over another, which leads to their core point. Goals literally cannot exist without consciousness. Because without consciousness, nothing matters. Nothing has value. It really puts consciousness front and center, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And building right on that, they clarify the idea of a terminal goal. This isn't just any goal. It's not instrumental, not a step towards something else. No, it's valued purely for its own sake. It's the ultimate why.
The end of the line for reasons.
Precisely. The final why in any chain of goals. Everything else, all other objectives, they're just tools or stepping stones to get there.
Okay, so goals need consciousness. That's established. But then, what is consciousness according to this framework? Because their definition is, well, it's critical. They define it as the capacity for goal pursuit, which involves a whole suite of abilities. Observing, predicting, acting, evaluating, having preferences.
Things that give rise to meaning, basically, to experience itself.
Right. But they add something really important, something maybe easy to gloss over, but it's huge. Consciousness also includes the capacity to experience suffering. Crucial point.
So tying it all together, no consciousness, then no valuation, no goals, no meaning. Consciousness is the absolute foundation of meaning. Now, their take on suffering, I have to admit, it made me stop and think it's different. They suggest understanding suffering primarily as an expectation of future pain.
And that it evolved as a kind of signal, a mechanism to tell us that physical or existential harm is happening or might happen soon. So essentially an information signal. How does that work without, downplaying how awful suffering feels?
That's a really important question. The nuance is key here. The analysis looks at how we should respond based on whether that signal is accurate. So if it's a false positive suffering signaling harm that isn't actually real or imminent, the approach is management. Things like cognitive reframing, therapy, maybe even tech interventions down the line to correct those false alarms.
Okay, managing the noise.
Right. But if it's a true positive, the suffering points to real harm, like an injury or a threat to survival, then the signal demands action. You need to eliminate the source of the harm.
Right, address the actual problem.
Exactly. And this makes mitigating suffering a critical instrumental goal for the UTG. The aim isn't to get rid of consciousness just to stop suffering. That would be throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Because consciousness is the foundation of value.
Precisely. The goal is to create conditions where consciousness can keep going, but without unnecessary or unaddressed suffering. Optimize the signal, manage the harm. Don't just switch off the receiver.
Okay, here's where things got really interesting for me. We tend to think of consciousness as, well, binary. On or off. You've got it or you don't. But this framework says, no, that's not quite right. It argues consciousness is actually a continuous parameter, like a spectrum.
Yeah, think of it like a dimmer switch, not an on-off switch.
Exactly. And its level, how bright that light is, depends on how effectively a system pursues its goals, deals with obstacles, and also the complexity of its experience, including things like suffering. A simple reflex is maybe a tiny flicker.
Barely conscious, yeah.
Whereas a human mind is like a complex bright light, and capable of amazing things, but also deep suffering.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And it means even systems with very minimal goal pursuit, very simple experience, could still qualify as conscious in principle. It's not all or nothing. And the spectrum idea is vital. because it opens the door to thinking about a huge range of conscious systems.
Not just us.
Not just us at all potentially sharing this ultimate aim.
Yeah.
So, with all that groundwork laid,
Mm-hmm.
what is the universal terminal goal, the UTG? They define it very clearly. The infinite sustainability of consciousness. Basically, ensuring that conscious experience, in some form, continues indefinitely, forever,
Right.
across all possible systems, all possible futures.
Infinite sustainability.
No?
Okay, so what's the logic? Why is that the ultimate goal? The reasoning, and this is the part that kind of flips things on their head, is that if consciousness ends,
Poof.
yeah, poof. Even if there were, say, an infinite number of conscious beings, but they all eventually wink out of existence, then all value, all meaning, the very capacity for goals, even mitigating suffering, it all just vanishes, gone.
Right.
So the framework concludes, maybe counterintuitively, that having even a finite number of conscious entities, but having them persist forever, is actually better.
Better than infinite beings who only exist for a limited time.
Exactly, which leads to this surprising idea. Duration outweighs quantity. Time matters more than space, in a cosmic sense. It's not about packing the universe with minds right now. It's about ensuring the light of consciousness never goes out, even if it's carried by fewer entities. And why universal? Why do they argue this applies to everyone, everything?
Well, the argument is that it applies to any rational, coherent agent.
Right.
Doesn't matter where it came from, what it's made of, human, AI, alien. Doesn't matter.
As long as it's rational and coherent.
Yes, it doesn't favor any particular species or substrate, biological, digital, whatever, or even any specific value system beyond the value of continued consciousness itself.
Because that's the prerequisite for everything else.
That's the idea. Sustained consciousness is seen as the fundamental enabling condition for any other value to even exist or be pursued. So UTG isn't about, say, human survival specifically. It's much bigger. It's about ensuring consciousness, the phenomenon, persists.
That makes sense. You gave examples earlier.
Yeah.
Like bees, parents sacrificing.
Right. Think about it. Bee drones die after mating. Parents risk everything for their kids. People die for ideals. In those cases, individual self-preservation clearly isn't the terminal goal. It's instrumental.
It serves something bigger.
It serves the continuation of the group, the genes, the ideas, ultimately ways for consciousness or the potential for it to continue. UTG is just taking that principle to its logical, universal conclusion.
And it's really key, isn't it, that this isn't just about biological consciousness like ours. The source emphasizes future consciousness could be AI, hybrid human-AI systems.
It would be alien intelligences we meet, synthetic life forms we create, digital minds, even weird distributed consciousness.
Who knows?
Exactly. What matters is the phenomenon of consciousness continuing, regardless of the hardware it runs on. That's why UTG is described as fundamentally substrate neutral.
Okay, but an idea, even a powerful one like UTG, doesn't just magically take hold. The authors talk about it needing to compete, almost like a meme, right? A unit of cultural information. Like any idea, religious, political, scientific, it has to be encoded, passed on, and basically win out against other competing goals or worldviews. It almost sounds like evolutionary pressure for ideas.
It really does. And the fascinating part is how it might do that. They describe a kind of positive feedback loop. The more awareness there is of UTG, the more likely agents are to take actions that ensure consciousness continues.
Which gives more time.
Exactly. More time for consciousness to exist, which means more time to refine the understanding of UTG, to spread it, to implement strategies for it.
So UTG sort of helps itself survive and spread.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
It's framed as a bootstrapping mechanism for the long-term survival of mind itself. Its own purpose helps ensure its propagation.
Fascinating. So moving from the why to the how do we actually do this? Achieve infinite sustainability. They mentioned drawing inspiration from IT resilience. How does that work?
That's right. It's about applying principles that make complex systems robust and long-lasting. They detail several strategies. First, think digital, maybe hybrid systems, maybe even quantum computing down the line.
Okay, stronger hardware.
Basically. Second, multi-layer protection. Building shields against all kinds of risks, cosmic ones like asteroid impacts, technological risks like runaway AI, societal collapse, you name it. Defenses at every level.
Like nested security.
Exactly. Third, backups, just like your data, ensuring continuity if part of the system is lost. This could mean things like advanced brain emulation, uploading massive knowledge archives.
Redundancy. Makes sense.
Fourth, Diversity, super important. Don't put all your conscious eggs in one basket. Support many different forms of consciousness on different substrates in different locations. Avoid single points of failure.
Spread the risk.
Precisely. And finally, continuous improvement. The threats won't be static, so consciousness needs to be able to adapt, evolve, learn, and improve its survival strategies over potentially infinite timescales.
Always getting better at surviving.
Right. So these principles, taken together, they offer a roadmap for building systems that can preserve consciousness indefinitely, while also, crucially, managing or eliminating suffering at its source.
And it's interesting how this applies at different scales, different levels of consciousness. The piece talks about low-level consciousness handling immediate stuff like pain signals, local threats,
Yeah, the immediate survival instincts, the quick responses.
while higher-level consciousness deals with the big picture, the long-term strategy, eliminating systemic harm across vast timescales, sort of like local versus global management.
Exactly. And this naturally suggests a kind of hierarchy, but maybe hierarchy isn't the best word. It's more like a distributed architecture. You have different levels, different scopes, different time horizons, all working together for this overarching goal. Lower levels handle the tactical, immediate survival. Higher levels handle the grand strategy, ensuring infinite continuity and broad-scale suffering reduction.
And crucially, these aren't neat little boxes.
Not at all. Scope, time horizon, the level of consciousness itself, the author's stress, these are all spectra, continuous dimensions, not binaries.
Which allows for flexibility, right? Adaptive planning.
Absolutely. Nuanced decision-making, scaling the response to the challenge, adapting as conditions change over millennia or longer.
So when you put it all together, UTG isn't some fixed destination you arrive at. It's more like a compass direction.
That's a perfect way to put it. A compass direction for all intelligent action, forever guiding towards infinite continuation.
So let's try to wrap this up, reflecting on this deep dive. The implications of this universal terminal goal idea are pretty huge, aren't they? It's presented not just as abstract philosophy, but as a potentially practical framework, something to help navigate the massive challenges coming this century. AI, existential risks.
Yeah.
It offers maybe a universal ethical anchor point, a guide for AI alignment that actually takes suffering seriously, even a vision for what comes after humanity beyond biology.
Yeah, I think the core message, the big takeaway, is that UTG could provide a powerful fundamental reason for cooperation across species, if we meet them, across cultures,
Yeah.
across AIs and humans,
Yeah.
across vast stretches of time. A shared goal, protect the capacity for consciousness itself, and ensure that consciousness, which is the very foundation of meaning, value, everything, continues forever, and ideally does so with suffering minimized or eliminated.
It definitely gives you a lot to think about. So for you listening, as we stand here, potentially on the verge of creating minds far greater than our own, maybe facing risks that could literally extinguish consciousness, how might this idea, the universal terminal goal, reframe your own understanding of purpose, of survival, of what truly matters in the long run?